Hi there, my name is Beth Ann Kennedy. I'm the Artistic Managing Director of BZN International Film Festival, and we're having a really exciting opportunity this year. One of our focuses with the film festival is on gender equity, the stories told to the female perspective, and it is wonderful to be a part of this conversation. I'm going to step away, but fortunately there is somebody that's going to represent BZN on this Zoom recording. Bo Osorio is a filmmaker, and she was scheduled actually to have a conversation this morning with 3 filmmakers that are involved with BZN 2020. One was from Norway, one from the USA, and one from India. So she's going to represent BZN here. She's not going to be speaking, but will be a part of the end to the BZN, the recording end. Thank you so much for everything that you are all doing. You are representing hundreds of women. When I look at these faces, and that's what I think. I see hundreds and hundreds and thousands of women, and they are reaching out and they're saying, thank you for everything that you're doing. I'm gonna give it over to Bo now.
Thank you, Bo, and welcome. Good evening. My name is Jan Strout. I'm president of the Montana chapter of the National Organization for Women. NOW's purpose is to take action through intersectional grassroots activism to promote feminist ideals, lead societal change, eliminate all forms of violence and discrimination, and achieve and protect the equal rights of all women and girls in every aspect of social, political, and economic life. I want to welcome Bo and thank Beth Ann Kennedy. On behalf of our members and allies, we are pleased to welcome everyone to the second part of our It's Time Constitutional Equality for Women Now, a virtual event that both commemorates and thinks critically about the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, not only about the gains and losses of our constitutional right to vote, but also to create forward-looking, relevant visions and actions during this time of national reckoning around racial justice, women's rights, and voter rights from intersectional perspectives through this amazing presentation and panel discussion. I invite you to check out, explore, and get involved with feminist activism and organizing to take back our democracy and to advance equity and justice for all. In keeping with NOW's organizing principle of the power of we so appreciate the many people, groups, and allies who have made this 2020 Constitutional Equality Project possible, including the Bozeman Film Celebration and the digital platform bozemanartslive.com. You will view the co-sponsors list at the conclusion with our calls to action. We can each make a difference in defending and expanding our fundamental freedoms and human rights. For more information, go to our Facebook page, Montana Chapter of the National Organization for Women, and thank you for spending your time with us, and please share those with those who care. Together, we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you for hosting us today. My name is Kolieka Seigel, and I am the state president of the California National Organization for Women. I'm the first African-American. A little bit about me, I'm an intersectional feminist committed to institutionalizing gender equity and improving conditions and communities of color. I also sit on the National Racial Justice Task Force, and Jan Strout is actually a mentor of mine as our work in global feminism, as we try to use a human rights framework to the work that we do. I just actually came back from a delegation to Cuba with Jan, and I appreciate her leadership and the work we do within NOW and trying to bring all of these voices of color, intersectional leaders together. I am extremely excited about our program today to bring all of these leaders together from everywhere, from academia. We have students on the panel across all of the generations. We have elected officials, and it is a great pleasure and honor that we can bring some of the sunlight from California to you guys today. Well, First of all, I have the distinct pleasure and the honor of introducing our keynote speaker. And what an incredible woman we have, that she would take some time out of her day to spend with us here on the program of constitutional equality. And of course she would, because she really is the leading voice on the Equal Rights Amendment. And we're so proud to have her. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her incredible resume and bio, and I'm going to turn it over to our keynote. Carol Jenkins is a women's rights activist, award-winning author, television host, and Emmy Award-winning former television journalist. She is the co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality, sister organizations dedicated to the passage and enactment of the Equal Rights Amendment. A board member since the beginning in 2014 and an active participant in all of its initiatives, she joined the leadership team in December of 2018. The coalition is comprised of over 100 organizations and leaders across the country, representing millions of people working for equality for women. It provides research, education, and advocacy on the issues of constitutional equality, working on the state and federal levels with advocates and legislators. In the year 2020, the coalition was instrumental in the legislative advocacy work that brought about the 38th and final state, Virginia, needed for ratification, and the historic House of Representatives vote to dissolve the time limit on the Equal Rights Amendment. She was the founding president of the Women's Media Center, a nonprofit created in 2004 by Gloria Steinem, Robin Morgan, and Jane Fonda to increase coverage and participation of women in media. As president, she conceived the Progressive Women's Voices program to provide media training for women and girls, and she expanded SheSource, the largest portfolio of women experts in the country. She is extraordinary, and we're so glad to have her today. And I'm going to turn it over to Carol Jenkins.
Well, thank you so much, Beth Ann and Bo, Jan and Kolieka, for having me here today to be a part of this terrific program. Thanks for the opportunity to speak for a few minutes about the need for constitutional equality for all of us, and especially for needing it right now. I do have some good news for you. We are closer than we ever have been in this nearly century-long effort. We've met the requirements set out in Article 5 of the Constitution. Passage by 2/3 of Congress. That took place overwhelmingly way back in 1972, long before many of our panelists were born. And then ratification by the 38 states, another requirement. That happened this year, 2020, when Virginia ratified the ERA on January 27th. And on February 13th of this year, the House of Representatives dissolved the time limit on the ERA, and much more about that coming up. There's even more good news. Even though this fight seems endless and hard, the American people are with us. The ERA Coalition's research a couple of years ago indicated that more than 90% of Americans, no matter what party, what age, what ethnic orientation, support the Equal Rights Amendment. They support equality for women. This is something that you need to keep in mind as you work for this. You are not alone. Most of Americans are with you. A Pew study, in fact, just this year confirms overwhelming support for the ERA itself. So we are held up now in the courts and in Congress over that time limit that I mentioned earlier, inserted in the amendment's introduction, not in the amendment itself. It was first a 7-year limit and then extended to 3 more years, during which time we got as far as only 35 states. And I say only, but I really think that was a miracle in itself, that you were able to get 35 states then to agree on anything, or 2/3 of Congress. Incredible. If we could imagine trying to do that again now in the current climate of our life in this country, that would be very, very hard indeed. Well, what we assert, those of us who are working for the adoption of the ERA to the Constitution, is that since the states never voted on the time limit, it wasn't in the amendment itself, that it should not stand in the way of equality. But we are held up by a few but very powerful anti-ERA legislators mostly. The US Senate has refused to take up the bipartisan bill to remove the time limit. The ERA, the Future of Women's Equality, will be on the ballot in November. We must elect pro-ERA candidates for every office in the country, but especially in the Senate, or we may see equality slip out of our hands. We have the chance to do it this coming year, but it really depends on what we all in this country do in November. And we're a nonpartisan organization, the ERA Coalition, so we're not talking about Republican, Democrat, Independent. We're talking about pro-woman or anti-woman, pro-ERA or anti-ERA candidates, and that's the way we have to look at everything. So given the recent throngs in the streets protesting the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, the shooting of Jacob Blake, and charges of racism and sexism inherent in our society, that seems to be the talk of every single day that we have now. It's not surprising that many of us believe that systemic change is required in America, systemic change. And to that point, what we believe is that there is nothing more systemic than the core legal document that dictates our rights and protections, and that is the US Constitution. The Constitution is, in fact, the system, and until we fix it so that everyone is included, we will fail to be the democracy we think we are. Many people believe that we've been living in a true democracy where there's true equality. As we can see, just as this country is examining itself, we who do this work have to look at ourselves as well. We are diverse, or are we? Our organizations, our systems are structurally fair, or are they? And that's the hard work that we are called to do now. As we work for constitutional change, we must make organizational change as well. And it has to be deep change, not just changing the top of any organization. As we move forward in this work, we're called to be better than that, fairer than that, if we're looking for equality in the United States of America. As we've seen in the current celebration of the centennial of the women's vote, the major thrust of it has been the rewriting of its history, putting into the story for the first time all the work done by women of color from 1832 to the present. And that's what many historians believe, that it was Black women in an organizational meeting in 1832, not 1932. 1832 was the beginning of the current women's rights movement in this country. But of course, they were left out of the story of equality until now. So that's the work that's being done, talking about the vote. And what we have to keep in mind, that we would not be as close as we are to the ERA now if a Black woman state senator in Nevada named Pat Spearman had not led that state's ratification in 2017. Or in 2018, that legislator Jan Strout, now the lieutenant governor of Illinois, had not fought for it. Or in Virginia, if two Black women, Senator Jennifer McClellan and Delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy, had not successfully carried the bills to give us the 38th state. We all have personal stories about why we do what I call the equality work. I learned the concept of equality from my feminist grandfather, a Black farmer in rural Lowndes County, Alabama, just outside of Montgomery. He was the father of 15 children, one of them my mother. He had 9 girls and 6 boys. And as a family treasure, we have a newspaper article written about him in the white local paper, if you could imagine. That was astonishing, in the 1940s. It extols his unheard of decision and ability to send all 9 of his daughters to college while keeping the boys at home to run the farm. That was standard. Sending girls to college then, especially a Black rural farmer, was not standard. He said he believed his girls deserved a fair chance at life. Well, think about that. What that decision produced in that and in successive generations of our family was a small army of doctors, lawyers, professors, businesswomen, writers, a pretty impressive crop for a small piece of land owned by an equality-believing father. That farm would later play a part in American history as the third stopover in the march from Selma to Alabama, to Montgomery, Alabama, led by the late John Lewis. Two men, my grandfather, Billy Gardner, the farmer, and the Congressman John Lewis, believers in justice and equality and fighters against racism and sexism, which so often go together. America needs the Equal Rights Amendment. Women are most of the impoverished of our country. You know, we're often asked this. Why should women need an ERA? Aren't they equal? Don't they have everything that they need? And I always say, if you looked at the poor of America, they are mostly women. They are the or underemployed, the underpaid, subjected to domestic and sexual assault, aggression, lacking in protections and rights. And here's an important key, the one that I go back to all the time, because if you're talking about equality, it's not some abstract thing. The children of these women are hungry. 1 in 4 children in America has no idea where or if a next meal is coming from. And people of color and non-binary people are most subjected to discrimination, and therefore, if you ask me who's going to benefit from the ERA, therefore they stand to benefit the most from the Equal Rights Amendment. Think about that, starving children. That's what we're talking about, not an abstract, wouldn't it be nice to have equality? It's an essential piece of our democracy. This year, we mark the 20th anniversary of the deaths of Jessica Lenahan's 3 daughters. They were killed by their father, who abducted them. Colorado police did not enforce her order of protection. Her case went all the way to the Supreme Court, where it was determined there that she had no rights. It wasn't spelled out in the Constitution. It was the esteemed conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia who confirmed that our Constitution, as it is, does not prohibit discrimination based on one's sex. We need the ERA. We will be able to write legislation to protect all Americans, and that's an important piece about the ERA. It brings equality, yes, and it also gives us the right to write laws that will make sure that we correct, all of the things that are wrong about our society, including starving children. The current pandemic has exposed for all to see what inequality breeds, and that it truly can mean the difference between life and death. And we now clearly see who does the essential work in this country, low-paying work with no health insurance. The framers of our Constitution, white, wealthy, mostly slave-holding men, left out a few people for inclusion in rights and protections. They left out slaves, we know that, and they left out women. But knowing that the future might hold some surprises, the founders included an amendment process, a way to fix the country going forward. Very great foresight on their behalf. The Constitution, therefore, has been amended 27 times so far to correct things that were left out. The Equal Rights Amendment would be the 28th Amendment, and while popularly known as, let's put women in the Constitution, we used to say that ourselves, right, until it became clear that it was more than about that. What this simply states is that one cannot be discriminated against based on one's sex. It seems a pretty good idea for everyone, we think, especially since the recent Supreme Court decision that puts trans, LGBTQ, and non-binary individuals within the definition of sex. So we're talking about our entire country. We're talking about everybody needing the Equal Rights Amendment. But we are approaching a century of work, if you could imagine, attempting to get that fix into the Constitution, what we call that simple fix. It was first introduced in Congress by Alice Paul in 1923. Shortly after helping win suffrage for women in 1920, she realized that that was one more thing missing, an explicit statement of equality between the sexes that was necessary. Because we've been voting for 100 years now, or at least white women have. We know that Black women got it a half a century later. But all of that voting has not created equality for women in the United States. So it takes more than a vote. It was almost a half a century later in 1972 that seemingly the impossible became almost possible. 2/3 of Congress, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, voted for the ERA. Now, I'm told that the insertion of the time limit, although only in the introduction, not on what the states would vote on, made Alice Paul, who was still alive to see her dream move forward, it made her cry. I think she knew then that it would cause us trouble, and it still does to this day, almost 100 years later. Let me say a few words of appreciation for the women of the 70s and 80s, because sometimes later generations sort of blame them for not getting the job done. Women like Ellie Smeel, Gloria Steinem, Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Bella Abzug, Elizabeth Holtzman, a representative of millions of women and men across this country who raised money, mailed letters, marched, and fought against big business, the insurance industry in particular, who were the real opponents of the ERA. And big business is still a culprit in women's inequality. Some would call them the benefactors, or achieving the benefit from cheap labor. And who are the cheap labor? They are the women of America who almost always, often, if it happens once, it's too much, or paid less, less than men. Without the 38th state, the ERA movement seemed to fall silent, in the 80s, although many continue to work for it. We have members in our coalition who have been working their entire adult lives for equality. So it never really stopped. Just attention was taken away from it. And quite frankly, many of us, including me, felt that maybe progress was being made and we didn't need an ERA. That was a period where you had the first woman of that, the first woman doing, who became a CEO. We had all of those firsts, and sadly, we still have all of those firsts. Back then, we described that as the pipeline. Women were in the pipeline, and one day they would emerge, fully equal in the boardroom, the science lab, the White House, everywhere. And gradually we began to realize that that was a false promise, or at least one that few of us alive today would still be alive to see. I think the latest estimates for true gender equality moving at the rate we are now could be another century away. And some think it's even longer than that. Our work got a big boost from the 2016, the colossal worldwide women's marches, the heartbreaking impact of the Me Too movement. That was when the ERA Coalition began to do most of its work. We were born a couple of years earlier by Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, and we should always put her in our list of heroes, because she would introduce the ERA every single session, and every single session it got ignored and never came up for a vote. Another participant in the creation of the coalition, in addition to Carolyn Maloney, was lawyer and human rights activist Jessica Newworth, one of our co-founders. And the idea was to provide a forum for all of the, mostly women, but some men too, and women and their organizations to work together. And we have worked together. We continue to do that. The coalition has grown to a membership of over 100 organizations representing millions of girls, women, and non-binary individuals. Our next goal is 200 organizations that will include social justice, disability, all kinds of organizations that had never thought of the Equal Rights Amendment as having anything to do with them. And now they understand, as we do, as that we are all in this together. And the way of power is for all of us to be moving forward together. Two things are happening now. We're in court. The attorneys general of the last 3 states to ratify, Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia, filed a lawsuit compelling the archivist to certify the ERA. And just as a side note, the archivist is the head librarian of the United States. It's his job to actually attach the amendments to the Constitution that gives equality to all of us. And he's been directed by the current Department of Justice not to do it. And what he said is that he'll have to wait for a court, meaning the Supreme Court, to perhaps decide that. So we are in court. We've filed amicus briefs, the coalition, along with 52 women's and social justice organizations, over 90 businesses, corporate America, many mayors, attorneys general from across the country, all filed support of this lawsuit compelling the archivist to certify and publish the Equal Rights Amendment. We await a decision on that and other cases that have been filed. And we're in Congress. We need the United States Senate to follow the House in removing the time limit. What we must do in November is elect equality. We must ask every candidate for every office, do you support women? Do you support us? Do you support the ERA? If not, I'm sorry. We must withhold our support for you, because what's at stake is constitutional equality, and we need it now. Thanks, everybody, for the very hard work that you're doing for all of us. We really appreciate it.
Let's give her a round of applause. Virtually, I guess that's the hand waves virtually.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol, for laying out the importance of equality work and really outlining the systemic and structural changes necessary to improve our system, because women deserve better. We stand on your shoulders, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing your panel.
Feel free to stick around with us. Thank you so much, Carol. And now we're going to turn it over to our esteemed, diverse panel that we have with us today. They're going to be kind of bridging off of the amazing keynote that Carol gave. Oftentimes, in a lot of our organizing, the people that I interact with that are our age and younger really believe that the ERA is a done deal. Don't women already have equal rights? And they really don't understand that legal equality, as Carol outlined, could slip through our fingers. So I'm going to introduce our panelists and have them kind of unpack this and really answer the question after I introduce them of why does the ERA and the preservation of voting rights matter, okay? We're going to start first with Lei-Anna Bertelsen. Lei-Anna is a passionate advocate for public education. She's a former classroom teacher of 17 years, curriculum specialist, instructional coach, and teacher facilitator. She is inspired by the belief that equity in public education is a democratic right. She has expanded her work in recent years to activism and advocating for rights for all women by helping to organize the Galatian and Park County Women's March in 2019 and 20, and is the co-leader of Bozeman's recently reformed Equity Task Force. Lei-Anna, we're so glad to have you. You want to answer the question on why does the ERA matter?
Yeah, thank you. It took me a moment to unmute there, but thank you very much. And to Jan and Bo and Beth Ann and Kolieka for hosting and giving me the opportunity to speak about something that I feel is just so incredibly important. My bio says that I've been an educator for a number of years, and it is first and foremost that my belief in equity in public education is the place to start and can be a game changer, especially now as we're seeing what's happening in our culture and about schools and how important that role is in all of our communities. But what I want to say about why does the ERA and the voting rights matter? In addition to everything that Carol spoke about, I just have to look to not only the teeth of the Constitution having that framework that we can stand on as women to claim what I think of as our equal rights, but when you just look at the current makeup of Congress and the Senate, we're 84% men in Congress and 80 or maybe 76% men in the Senate. We don't have equal power. We don't have an equal voice. And I think also, as I'm just going to give you images because this is what pops up for me. I think of that image of a bunch of men sitting around a table deciding about women's bodies. And excuse me, that's offensive. And then I go right to the women who are currently have those positions in Congress and in the Senate, who are asking the hard questions. I go right to Kamala Harris questioning Brett Kavanaugh. So can you name a question, can you name a law that in any way about men's bodies? So countless times I look to those women who are in those positions of having access to power, being able to put those hard questions out there. We need that voice so, so much. I'm a mother of 3. I have 2 daughters. I think about the impact on their lives, everything from, you know, their ability to control their own bodies in the future, being able to feel supported in the decisions they make in their careers, and having that protection under the law. So it's personal on that end as well. You know, in education, and I'll just dive into this a little bit. I've been in education for a long time, and the thing about it is I'm a pretty good educator. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I found my place as a classroom teacher and working with teachers now in math education. And initially, I did not want to be a teacher because I believed, you know, that's women's work. I had all kinds of negative connotations about what that meant, and almost didn't want to pursue that path, even though it's something that I have a calling for. And I think it's a shame that we denigrate those kinds of positions and industries where it's about caring for other people. I don't know, you know, that's something I've thought about so many times. Why is that kind of work devalued? Why is that kind of work not given the recognition when it is vital for our economies, for our societies, for our cultures? And it's taking me to be 55 to feel proud of the work that I've done, regardless of what our culture and our society says. So yeah, ERA matters on some very fundamental levels to me personally, and to what I'm able to contribute in my own community.
Thank you so much, Lei-Anna. Wow, for your story. Tell us a little bit about yourself. But I see another panel already coming about on why is women work not valued. Absolutely. We could have a whole discussion just on that. Thank you. Our next panelist, is an incredible young leader, Lyla Brown. Reintroduce you to Miss Lyla and give her the stage, because I think that her voice is powerful and it's so needed and necessary. So to tell you a little bit about Miss Lyla Brown, she is a current MSUC senior, actually, studying sociology with a focus on criminology, with 2 minors in women, gender, and sexuality studies, as well as psychology. She co-founded the Black Student Union in 2018 with Jamel Phillips and has served as the president for the 2 past years. I'm so glad we got that together, Lyla, because I wanted to hear what you had to say. And so I want you to answer that first question for me and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I guess the first question about why I think ERA is so important, or like what aspects of it that I value or want to uplift, are the pieces from the documentary that we watched about gender violence. I know Marena kind of talks about that a little bit, but I wanted to expand on it a little bit more. It's a very personal topic to me. There's like a statistic that I've read that it's 40% of Black women will experience interpersonal or domestic violence in their lifetime. And knowing that some of those protections aren't there to keep Black women safe and protected, or just all women in general, and knowing that if something were to happen to me or someone that I care about, that they might not be able to be protected because they aren't constitutionally protected, is a very scary thought for me, and something that I don't really want to I don't want to think about or even face down the road. And the second part of that question is that support for mothers. Again, from the documentary, they were talking about house programming, social programs, welfare, whatever you want to call it, for single parents, single mothers has gone down and gone away. I was raised by a single mother during the Great Recession a few years ago. I saw the strength that she had to go through. It was just her and I. And she did the best that she could, and she did an amazing job. But those are things, looking back now, being in college and kind of reading articles and being able to have some of those more intelligent conversations about what actually happened and have an understanding of that. It's very frustrating to look back on and know that there just wasn't support or like much caring towards parents, specifically single parents, single mothers during that time. So I think those are like the 2 largest aspects that I care about from the ERA. As like, it's hard to choose like one or two aspects that you're like, wow, I'm super stoked about those. But I think if I had to choose, those are the two that I'm very passionate about.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. So on your organizing, and in your, in the breadth of your work, our next panelist is Ellie Cornish. Ellie is a 15-year-old sophomore at Bozeman High School who is extremely passionate about gender equality and affecting positive change. She had a high school fellowship with Ford, Montana, working on youth civic engagement, and she is a member of the Bozeman High School speech and debate team, the Bozeman Task Force on the status and safety of all women and girls. Thank you so much for being with us, Ellie, today. You want to go ahead and answer our question for all the panelists? Why does the ERA matter?
Yeah, of course. I hate to say it, but I thought that the ERA had already passed, as you mentioned, Kolieka. It's a lot of the younger generation, we just kind of take it for granted and assume that it's self-explanatory that gender equality exists and is protected by our Constitution. So it was kind of a shock to me that it wasn't, and I heard a lot more about the struggle from my grandmother, former Representative Pat Schroeder of Colorado, and I really realized that we're not equal under the law in many ways, and I want a better future and for the ERA to pass. I want like equal pay for equal work and a choice for women to have a choice about their bodies and have family leave and be able to get pregnant safely and be protected and paid for their work that they're doing and be protected from domestic abuse and sexual assault and so much more equality for the future. And I want it to be protected by the law because right now it isn't. And I also want it to be in the Constitution and it to be laid out in black and white print that we are equal. Thank you. I think it's super important. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. And having young, fearless advocates like yourself talking about why it is not codified yet is going to go a long way in really getting this generation up to speed and on board. Thank you, Ellie. Our next panelist. Our next panelist is actually an elected official. I'd like to take the moment to introduce Kimberly Dudik, Montana State Representative and former Montana Assistant Attorney General. Such a pleasure to have her with us today. Kimberly Dudik is a recognized champion for criminal justice reform, child protection, and protecting citizens' rights. Kimberly has served the people of Montana, pushing for progressive change as a state legislator, deputy county attorney, assistant attorney general, registered nurse, and domestic violence advocate, while her leadership expands across is very expansive and across all the different intersections of the work that we do. Thank you, Kimberly. Can you answer our question that we have posed to all the panelists? Why does the ERA matter?
Yes, thank you so much, Jan, Bo, Beth-Ann, and Kolieka for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I am very passionate about equality. So the question is, why does the ERA matter? So we live in Montana, where we're actually fortunate because our Montana Constitution in Article 2, Section 4 says that no person shall be denied equal protection of the laws and that no person, state, corporation, or institution shall discriminate against any person on the exercise of their civil or political rights on account of their gender. So you would think then that we have full equality in Montana and that there is no discrimination that occurs. But anyone who lives here knows that that is not the case. And we're living in a moment right now where there are calls across the board for institutional changes, for sexism to stop, for racism to stop. And having the ERA fully passed and ratified and part of our US Constitution will firmly plant a stake in the ground saying, we demand equality at all levels. And we're going to start pushing for the changes to make that happen. it's not enough even just to have it as part of our Constitution, but we need to look at all of our laws and see really where we have to make those changes. For example, dealing with consent to sexual intercourse, women are disproportionately impacted by that violent crime. And how can we make sure that equality is happening in the justice system? Or even with, if a woman is sexually assaulted, then how is her rape kit processed? Is it just going to sit on a shelf for decades? Or, you know, how can these small changes in the law truly push for equality? And it's an exciting moment to be alive and actually to be able to look at these changes and step back and say, okay, let's make sure that we actually have equality for everyone, because without that, we are not going to have a true democracy. And until all of us are equal, then truly none of us are equal. And we see that now in the intersectional way that the women's rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement and that we see, you know, with missing and murdered Indigenous people, all of us are connected, and the violence that permeates our society needs to stop. And having the Equal Rights Amendment stating that we need equality is a good step forward to planting that stake to say no more.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you for your leadership in helping to institutionalize gender equity. Thank you so much. And our last panelist, I'd like to introduce Marena Mahto. Marena Bright Eyes Mahto is an enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes and a political science major at Montana State University in Bozeman. She is a social justice activist, having worked closely with No DAPL Movement, Indigenous Peoples Day Bozeman, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and many other issues pertaining to Indigenous communities in the United States. We are so glad to have you with us, Marena. Can I have you answer the question posed to the panelists on the importance of the ERA and what the preservation of voting rights matter?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. First, I'd like to introduce myself in my native language. So, Nawa Shuksu, Kataha Gidibas na Marena Mahto, Tatachita, Kani, Twita, Tsan, and Asanish. Good morning, my relatives. My native name is Bright Eyes, and my English and Lakota/Mandan name is Marena Mahto. Mahto means bear in the Lakota and Mandan languages. As you heard, I am an enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikaraut nations of northwestern North Dakota. So pertaining to the question, why does the ERA and voting rights matter to me personally? In Indian country, we have a large demographic where a lot of our people are not physically able to vote. And that is mostly because of reservation status. I know a few years ago in North Dakota, we actually had this problem with voter suppression. Our tribal IDs were ruled not eligible for voting matters, and we couldn't vote using our tribal ID if it had a P.O. box address on it. Well, as a lot of people know, a lot of our people do not have physical address on reservations. They're usually on county highways and BIA roads. And so with North Dakota, they were trying to suppress the native vote to rig the election, so to speak, in terms to state representatives. And so with that, we were urging people to try and get a physical address so that we would have representatives go out to the reservations to talk to mostly elders who were eligible to vote. However, they were deemed uneligible because they lacked a physical address. And so having this voting rights issue addressed is very, very crucial, considering that the Native American populace is a large percentage of voting issues and stuff like that. And so with the ERA, what came to mind in that film that we had watched, Equal Means Equal, I was more so drawn to the domestic violence portion of it. I am an advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women. I have worked very closely with families in North Dakota and Montana specifically. And according to statistics that we know of, 1 out of 3 Native women will be raped in her lifetime. I didn't have that impact fully dawn on me until it happened to me. And I'm unfortunately a part of that statistic. So having the ERA passed and having more rights for women, especially BIPOC, people of color, Black, Indigenous. We're mostly affected by all these statistics at a higher rate than our white counterparts. And it's scary to be a woman, especially a people of color, Black, Indigenous, especially now in this time of business day and age, especially here in Texas. We have a human trafficking problem. And so what I would like to see from that is having more, being able to feel safe again. That's what's most important for me in this.
Thank you, Marena, for the power of your story and for your vulnerability from a survivor to another. Thank you for, and also for just the intersectionality within that answer. And stay with me for a minute here as we go ahead and move to the next question is, and I guess you kind of already answered it, but if you want to expand upon, is that what would legalized equality, how would that impact your own personal life specifically?
As I mentioned before earlier in my answer, like you said, I probably already answered it. But yeah, it would help me as a woman feel safer. And I'm more feminine, but I do identify as non-binary. So what Carol Jenkins said earlier in her keynote was really powerful for me because I identify as they, them, she, her. And I identify as non-binary and bisexual. And so it would help me so much to just feel safe again, especially because I live right outside the Houston area. I live right outside one of the biggest cities in the United States. And you can see it every day when you go down to downtown Houston. And you see people who are homeless and and it's mostly women. I have seen a lot of homeless women in this city. And it's scary because a lot of those homeless women are either brown or Black. And so having that safety for not only just people who do have a roof over their heads, but for those who don't even have a home to go home to, that would help so much with the safety impact. And especially in the US Constitution, I always think about this, especially when someone asks me, what does the US Constitution mean to you? Well, I'm referred to as a merciless Indian savage in the Constitution. And just having that, I'm that merciless Indian savage. I'm an Indigenous person. Having more equal footing in our own Constitution, just in the wording, would solve a lot of problems on that front in terms to stereotypes. And yeah, as we all know, stereotypes are like one of the first steps to marginalizing groups of people.
Thank you, Marena. This panel is fire. Absolutely. I knew that I came for my blessing today. I want to expand that question and open it up to the rest of our panelists. And you guys can just signal if you guys want to bridge upon that. Is that what would legalize equality? How would that impact your own life? Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Lei-Anna.
Well, first, before I respond to that, Marena, thank you so much for your story. Yeah, that's brave, and I appreciate you. All those components.
Thank you.
I thought about this question, how would this impact me right now? One of the things that was mentioned in my bio also is that I'm part of the Bozeman Task Force that was recently formed about the status and safety for all women and girls. And like part of it is about gender-based violence, and then part of it is about economic security in our community. And that goes back to my original question, or my original statements about women getting equal pay for equal work. One of the things that we found in Bozeman, so the answer to the question is that if there was the teeth to that in our Constitution, then the work of our task force would be a pretty straight line that we could say, these are the things that we're seeing happening in our communities, and having the backup right there in the Constitution would be powerful. As far as economic security in Bozeman, I look at something as simple as, once again, the work that women do being paid less for work that's traditionally more male. So one of the things we found is you can be certified as a nurse's assistant through the job service office. And a starting wage for that job is somewhere around 14 bucks an hour. Or you can be certified to be a CDL driver, and that starts at something like close to 23 bucks an hour. So here we're looking at two certified positions that are equally important and have this training, one traditionally female and one traditionally male, being a huge gap. And you see that reflected everywhere, where like at the university, to get a lead teaching job at their preschool there, which requires all these things from the kind of degree that you need and the responsibilities that are included. And because it's childcare, that starts off at a much lower starting pay than if you are in a different position that has the same sort of level of responsibility. So I think those are the kinds of things that we can continue to point out, and we would have the teeth in it right now to be able to say, in Bozeman, in our community, let's write this. And having the backup of it would make me feel like our task force's job would be easier.
Exactly, exactly. We have not reached parity. We have a long way to go, and this is a critical first step. Thank you. Did anybody else want to contribute? Thank you. Kimberly, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. You know, I want to go back actually to the movie that we watched, and something that struck me in there was a discussion on how women primarily have to depend on like welfare programs or food programs to feed their children. And me personally, I identify she, her, hers, and I come from a middle-class white family in Montana, which is predominantly white. But since I also grew up in a rural area, and my family, my mother's side of the family, she grew up as one of 15 children. And I hear stories about when she grew up and that they actually had no food on the table. And at one point they nearly starved to death. And it struck me that there was no real social services at that time because of the way our country was. And my grandfather was not in the picture, yet my grandmother was the one trying to feed her children. And what I see professionally, and so that's just, kind of a personal thought I have that drives some of my policy work. So my personal and professional kind of meld together here, because professionally as a state legislator, I have served on what's called the Appropriations Committee, where we set and examine the state budget every 2 years. And I'm also chairperson for the Finance Committee right now. So we look at different financial issues. And one thing that always happens when we have a small budget or budget problems, deficits in our state, is cuts are proposed. And those cuts are almost always proposed at these social services that impact women, and that women rely upon to feed their children, or that they rely upon to receive an education so that they can actually provide for those children. And I think that if we had the ERA, it would give, like Lei-Anna said, that it would give more teeth to the argument that that is not allowed. Or when you're looking at the pay structures of different organizations, a CDL or a teacher are treated differently, but also looking at even within state government, how are janitors, custodians treated as compared to secretaries? And, you look at the gender balance there. So I see that, as in my professional life, it would be personal to me, though, that it would be an ability to push more for those changes and really make a bigger issue out of them, because they exist now, but we haven't been able to do much about it, even though in our own Constitution, we are not supposed to discriminate based on the basis of sex. So that would be wonderful to have that. And personally, I have 4 children. I have 2 boys and 2 girls, and raising them, I grew up in the age where women have a right to control their reproductive health care. And when we like to think that all equality is guaranteed, but as we see, there are always pushes against that. And I want to be able to tell my boys and my girls that they are equal, and that the girls don't have to be concerned that they're more likely to be raped and not have justice happen, or that they're going to be paid less than their brothers just because they happen to be female. And it matters. What we say to our children and the benchmarks we set down matter to the entire society that we live in. And I really think the ERA will help push us forward and cause some of those changes we need.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you. Lyla, same question. How would the ERA impact your life personally? Is your feed working?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I'm gonna keep my video off just so it sounds better. Um, I think kind of to echo what Kimberly was saying, I like the equality piece of like raising children equally and saying, being able to look at my future children, oh, like whoever, like, and say, yeah, like you are equal, you are equally supported and prepared for other conversation. Whereas right now, like disparity is kind of scary for me. It kind of back to my first answer about gun violence and supporting parents. Like those are just two topics that are very personal to me, and the fact that as a woman and services and support from the government, I might not be able to get those. Can you hear me? Interesting.
Hi there. I'm wondering if we need to ask Lyla if she might want to re-enter and
Yeah.
have her answer this when she gets back.
Yes.
Because I know that happened to me.
Yeah, all the time, all the time. It's our digital world. Lyla, you want to go ahead and log out and come back on? So I want to hear everything that you have to say. Okay, you want to log out? Come on back on. All right. We'll go right on to Ellie. Same question.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I think that specifically having legal equality in our U.S. Constitution would affect my life in lots of ways. As Kimberly was saying, like for my future, I want to know that I'm protected by the law and feel safe and equal in whatever career I decide to do. And I think also, just from my perspective, being a high school student, taking action as part of the younger generation and making a better and more equal future for everyone.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Ellie. It looks like we have Lyla back. Let's see if it's if the connection is good, Lyla. Can you take yourself off mute?
Yeah, sorry about these technical difficulties.
It's quite all right.
I guess to finish off my question, answering the question that you had asked, I kind of heard the tail end of what Ellie said, and it's very similar. I'm hoping to a career and looking towards what that looks like for Black women and women in general. That they have people not listening to, not what you have to say. I would love to feel comfortable and equal and protected by my future employers and know that I'm being equally paid for the work that I'm doing. I'm passionate about what I want to do, so being compensated for what that my peers are being compensated for is very important to me. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And I could hear you well on the end, so it looks like we're good to go. Okay. We're gonna have the next question be led off by Kimberly. How can women of all generations and diversities work together to move forward constitutional equality and voting rights for all?
Thank you. I think it is so important right now that we find ways to break down the silos that have traditionally been put around us and find ways to find common ground and common goals and then work together. It's so easy to remain focused on the issues that we've traditionally focused on and not see the interconnectedness between the different groups we have. And whether you're 70 years old or 30 years old, 15 years old, it's important for us to be able to find those ways to connect and then decide what changes we want and then push forward to make those happen in a cohesive way. And to do that, I think, first of all, we need to be kind to each other. It's really easy to become frustrated in this environment and maybe not treat each other as kindly as we could. So it's important to be kind and also accepting, knowing that people come from different viewpoints and different experiences, but we all have the common goal of equality. So regardless of what differences we may have had, we're stronger together. And so how do we find a way to do that? And I think that that's actually, we have to find that space. And that's something that organizations like NOW or other organizations can help bring those groups together, because there isn't really a space in our busy lives, especially when we're trying to do so many things right now online or in reduced ways. It's hard to find that, but this is the time that we need to be pushing for these changes. There's an uproar now in our communities that racism and sexism is not acceptable anymore. So then what changes do we want to see? And it's not just about, I think, getting people elected, because that's important, but it has to be the right people, and we have to hold them accountable. Something else that I think is important is if we want to see more women in elected office, then the women who are saying that actually have to hold true to that and support the women who are actually running. And not just do it when it's convenient, and not just do it when they're not friends of somebody you know, but actually if you want true equality and true representation, then you should hold yourself obligated to vote for the right women for those positions, because that's the only way we're going to see 50% representation in our legislative bodies, in our rulemaking bodies, and in the positions that have never been held by women. So I think that we have to hold ourselves accountable, and also the people we know, but at the same time, be kind to each other and find a way to move forward together. There are no easy answers to this, but we have to demand the change we want now, or it is never going to happen.
Exactly, Kimberly. I couldn't agree more. It is imperative for us to continue to build the bench for other women. So that question is open for all panelists. And I'll just, one more time, this is how can women of all generations, and our organization also has struggled with some of this, and diversities work together to move forward constitutional equality and voting rights for all. And we can only do this together. As Carol Jenkins said, this is for all the panelists. Go ahead, Ellie.
I think I'll speak on the generations half of that. I think that it's super important to educate the younger generations as well and make them realize the extent that this inequality is still happening. And also, it's easy to feel if I can't vote that I'm powerless and can't really do anything about the situation, even though I'm passionate about these issues. That's not true. I think it's really important, that generation aspect of it, getting everyone involved and having future generations and the younger generations get involved and care about these issues as well.
Thank you, Ellie. I see another panel coming on about automatic voter enrollment and also expanding the voting rights to people younger than 18. I see another panel already. Go ahead. Anybody else want to go ahead and answer the question?
Go
ahead, Marena.
So in what ways, like what we can do, especially I'm going to speak on the diversity part of it, having our white counterparts uplifting marginalized voices, historically marginalized voices, especially BIPOC, as well as LGBTQ plus people, having us work together in terms to helping out our marginalized people speak up more. Because as a brown person, you're already low on the so-called totem pole. And it was just, it's hard to even just get our voice out there to begin with. And I think Lyla's going to speak more on that. And I know how well she is with her stuff too. And so, but having our white counterparts uplift and make spaces for us marginalized groups of people in the BIPOC arena would help a tremendous amount. Because as we've seen in our rights, you know, white women have had their struggle trying to just get to vote, whereas with brown people, we didn't get to vote until much later. And so, and that was just with gender and race involved. And so having that diversity acknowledgement, as well as acknowledging that there is white privilege within these groups, would help tremendously. Because when we work together, we need to make sure every single one of us has equal footing, both in gender and race.
Speak on it, as we say in California. Speak on it. Bring it. Lyla, I see you nodding your head. You want to piggyback on that answer? Speak on it. Come with it.
I'm talking a little bit in the question later about what it means to like have a white-led feminist organization. So I think I'm gonna save my answer for a little bit later. But I love everything you just said.
Okay. Anybody else want to go ahead, Lei-Anna.
Piggybacking off of all of that, I'd have to say that first, about as far as diversity, don't be afraid to ask for what you want and to claim it. That was a long time coming for me, because I think so much of it, especially living in Bozeman, Montana, which is very white, is to tell myself I'm too busy, like wanting to be a part of something and saying, well, but not feeling like I belong there. And the first step for me was getting over that belief that I didn't belong at the table. And that's a whole internal dialogue to get there. But I would say to be brave enough to ask for what you want and to step into that space when it's offered, or even if it's not offered, find a way, whether it's busting down the door or whether you do it politely, like find a way to make your way to the table. And then the other flip half of that is also piggybacking off what Kimberly was saying, is how we support each other, right? Or we were all speaking to that in some kind of way. But you see somebody like lend a hand, give support, give encouragement for anybody who's making that step. Like we can do this together. And I do think that's what we do best.
In total agreement. I particularly like the kicking down the door method. If the door isn't open for us. Thank you guys so much for answering that question and for the diversity of those all of your answers. All right, we're going to go on to our next question. And actually, Lei-Anna, we're going to have you go ahead and lead this one off. What will it take to achieve all voter rights when our democracy is under attack? And what do you think each of us can do?
So here's my plug and my passion for public education, because I really think it starts public education. We think of that in terms of economics often, like having an education helps us to advance ourselves economically, which absolutely is true. But I think the greater thing about a public education, it is the place that levels that playing field, right? Given that we support and that we give resources to and demand a fair and equitable public education. Because where else in our lives are we going to be in with a group of people of our peers that cut across all those different socioeconomic ties, diversity, all of it. It's right there. And schools, when given the resources, do tremendous things to bridge that equity and to have people experience that. But right now, public education is under serious attack. And I want everybody to, like right now, what you can do is find out who it is within your state and local elections that you can get behind their campaigns. Here in Montana, it's Melissa Romano, right? As opposed to for our Office of Public Instruction. It's also who we're voting for our governor. It's Cooney or Gianforte. Both the current people in Montana are not public education supporters. Gianforte, in fact, is downright will take away money and resources and frame it in such a way to make it seem like it's good to have choice in public education, not in the sense that he's talking about. And then the same thing with our Office of Public Instruction. So what we can do right now is find out, who is your supporter of public education, and get behind those local races in your state. So that to me is how I see is the way that everybody can make a difference.
Yes, it all happens. The immediate impact is on the local level. Thank you. Did anybody else want to jump in and add on to that question? It's open for y'all. I'll read it one more time. What will it take to achieve voting rights when our democracy is under attack? And what can each of us do? Did anybody else want to jump in that question?
I will, actually. Because I was speaking about this in my intro as far as voter suppression. As we know, I'm going to speak more on the indigenous side of it, because we do have that problem where our votes are being suppressed. I'm sorry if I keep looking to the side, my cat's trying to type on my keyboard. So when we talk about voter rights, a lot of people are like, well, we already have voter rights for women, or we have voter rights for everybody. It's all there, you know, you can access it. Well, how can we vote when our votes are being suppressed or we have gerrymandering going on, you know? And it's comes down to the fact that what we're looking at right now in our current political climate, we have people who are opposed to the mail-in ballot measure. And especially in a pandemic, isn't that kind of smart to mail in our votes, you know? I mean, down here in Texas, we have people coming in, like those images on Facebook that you see where you're taking down these postal boxes. That happens here in Houston. And I never thought I'd see that happen. And seeing those trucks just load up these postal boxes, and it's scary. And so, and what I've even noticed even further is that this happens in marginalized districts where people who are of BIPOC tend to live. Like in 3rd Ward, for example. 3rd Ward is one of the districts here in Houston where you'll see more marginalized groups of people, BIPOC, live. And people will call it the ghetto or this, that. I hate that word, I do. And whenever a white counterpart of mine, especially someone who I live with, says something like that, I'll get on them and say, you know, those are people. You know, that was not an accident that they're there. And so why are you going into these marginalized groups of people and their communities and taking down their postal services, you know, especially in the middle of a pandemic? And with Texas being one of the highest rates of COVID, you know, and you have all these people who can't afford healthcare, who can't afford going into a doctor. And on top of that, they're brown. So police brutality is a thing where they're just walking down the street. Why are you taking away their right to speak? Why are you silencing them? That's intentional. And so when we go down there, I always go down there to see if anybody needs help with groceries and stuff like that, because, you know, you never know. I'll even say, hey, you know, I know you don't know me, but if I start up a program or something to help these people in terms to like, hey, I'll take your ballot in to mail it. Like, you can just mail it and I'll just put it in the mailbox. I won't even touch it. Just have it in an envelope. I'll put it in the mailbox in another community where I know it's going to get mailed in. You know, so going out and doing that footwork, just simple footwork for not just yourself, but for people who can't afford to move from place to place would probably help a lot. I wish we didn't have to do that, but it's a necessity, especially now with the upcoming election.
Yes, it's a necessity where the system is working as it was designed. Yes. Thank you, Marena. Okay, we're gonna go on to our next question, and this is for you, Lyla. I know we recognize that some of these white-led feminist organizations have had some challenges, and I would like to unpack that a little bit with you. Can white-led feminist organizations change to be more inclusive? You know, as leaders in an anti-racist movement to advance human rights for all? If so, what do you think it will take and what is needed? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I guess the short answer is yes. I do think that white-led feminist organizations can change. I think that all organizations can change and shift to be inclusive and anti-racist. I kind of wrote like 3 large ideas. I had lots of thoughts on this when I was preparing. So I guess the first one is that organizations need to listen to BIPOC and queer voices. There's a large documented history of social movements being led by queer people of color. Marsha P. Johnson led a movement for queer folks and then was erased by white queer organizations pretty much immediately after. During her life, they are arrested, helped the civil rights, like Martin Luther King Jr.'s right-hand man, basically, but because he was gay, he was blacklisted and people didn't want him around. And I think that this just speaks to like erasure, and this is probably definitely a personal opinion, but this erasure of queer, POC, just people of color in general is a function of what like patriarchal white supremacy seeping down and harming activists at a very not like it's not harmful. They're not physically harming activists and social movement leaders, but they're harming them and their voices. They're hindering the impact that they could have had. Yeah. And the second part of this is acknowledging the history of discrimination and exclusion that women's suffrage, that feminist movement, feminist waves have had in the past. A few days ago, I came across something on Instagram. There was a quote from Susan B. Anthony, and it said she would rather cut off her own arm before giving the right for Black men to vote before women.
Yes.
And I think that I mean, I am a self-identified feminist, womanist. That's like my path to social justice, social movements is through feminism. And she has pointed to you as one of the first feminists, as one of the ones that we should all look up to. And I didn't know about that. She said that until this past week, and that's just astounding to me looking back. So I think that it seems very small, like acknowledging the histories, but I think it's very important to say, yeah, these movements are important and they got us to where we are. And at the same time, they excluded women, non-binary folks, trans folks, queer folks, people of color for years. And only now are we kind of starting to acknowledge that. And then the last part that I kind of thought about was having white feminist words be more inclusive is having BIPOC voices present. Black, Indigenous, people of color voices need to be at the table, and not as a token. And I know that this was already spoken on, but I think it's very important that to have a truly inclusive, anti-racist, equitable foundation for an organization, we need to have a multitude of voices being heard and being present. In Bozeman, I've helped organize some of the Black Lives Matter rallies that were very well attended. And one of our values in Bozeman American Racial Justice is valuing specifically Black women voices. And I think that kind of speaks to how like our structure has given platform for people for voices who might have not been able to attend or be invited to the table to show up. And so those are just a few of my ideas. Yeah.
That's a mighty few. That's a mighty few. And I loved how you laid out those initial betrayals when we're learning about the great feminist heroes of the past, the initial betrayal to women of color, and you laid the path out for how they can get it right. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit. As you talked about what they can do and allowing us a seat at the table and raw. And we struggle sometimes in our organizations with people wanting to retain power and not let Black women lead, not allow women of color to, take the forefront. Do you think that's important as well for people to push back on their privilege by allowing leaders to step in?
Yeah, I think that it kind of goes back to what I was saying, like these voices, they're usually there because they're powerful and have meaningful things and amazing things to say. And it's uncomfortable to shift and say, oh, I'm in this position of power because I hold a dominant characteristic. I'm white, I am cis, I'm X, Y, and Z. And I think it's important to understand that functions of privilege still can seep into these social movements. And it's not harmful to take a step back and say, I think that my voice isn't necessarily needed here. We should try and uplift other voices. I think it's hard to do. I also hold like a very high proximity to whiteness. I've had to do that while leading Black students on our campus, saying like, I don't think this is necessarily my topic. It's not the thing. I don't think I should be the prevailing voice out of this conversation. So then you need to go and find people who will achieve the goal and represent what is trying to be done correctly.
Sure. And thank you for that. Lyla, don't worry, it's okay. We're gonna have you come back and record so we can get the strength of your answer. We just are having a little bit trouble hearing you. With some feedback coming in. Did anybody else want to take that? Go ahead. Bring it to us, Marena.
I saw this and I wish Lyla wasn't having audio issues because I know her stance on this and I've seen her in action. She is a powerhouse. And so I don't know if I'm going to repeat anything that she says, and I hope I don't because I love hearing what she has to say. But when we talk about white-led movements, a lot of people will want to bring in brown people as a token. And that is a huge issue because, yeah, you want us to speak on these complaints that we have and these things that we live and see every day. But what kind of work are you putting in to make sure that that stays where we can speak and where we can talk as person to person versus like you have this sole person representing this group of marginalized people? And so that is a really big issue that I've noticed, especially down here in Houston. A lot of the movements that I do. My cat is messing with some wires. Sorry about that. But a lot of issues that I see down here, I get asked to speak about stuff, but a lot of times I won't get compensated, or it'll just be, hey, can you come speak about this trauma that you experienced in your childhood? And a lot of times, it's really insulting. It really is insulting because you want me to speak on this trauma that I have. It hurts to talk about. It does. It hurts to talk about. It's not fun talking about the time that you were sexually assaulted. It's not fun talking about the time that you got profiled in the grocery store. You know, I wish that didn't happen to me. And it happens to people who are more brown than me, you know. I know I'm fairly skinned, but someone like my mom who is dark complected will get profiled in the middle of the grocery store, and then organizations want me to come in and talk about that just to prove like, hey, we're doing this work for these guys too. Here's a representative telling you about that. But where is my compensation? Where is my equal footing in that conversation? So what white-led organizations can do is to continuously uplift us, have us speak first, make sure our spaces are safe for us to talk. Because otherwise, what is this for?
Exactly. They have a long way to go. Anybody else wanting to answer the question on what white-led organizations can do to improve, or can they? Okay. Thank you so much. And we will make sure that we get you Lyla's answer as soon as we absolutely can. Our next question is for Ellie. How does representation and intersectional diversity in media create positive change?
I think that, of course, legal issues and constitutional equality is one thing, but we also need to change just the whole attitude in general, if we can. It's really important to have representation of like empowering female characters in media, and I think also not just mainstream media like TV shows and things like that, but also media like news coverage, the way that political figures, women figures are addressed compared to men, and just seeing that and the inequality there. I think it's also about changing hearts and minds, and the impossible beauty standards that women are held to, and the fact that that's more focused on sometimes than what we're saying. I think that needs to be changed as well. And it's already an issue enough on magazine covers, these impossible beauty standards and over editing. But then from my perspective on social media, kids will use Facetune and photoshopping on their photos that they post and set themselves and others these impossible standards and feel really insecure about their appearance. And I think that needs to be addressed as well, because that doesn't even need to be approved. Kids can do whatever they want on social media and portray these images. So I think it's not just the legislation, it's also changing hearts and minds and showing empowered females.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. Lei-Anna, same question.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. Like that's something so prevalent, right? You know, with my daughters, and you know, guys too, but definitely for girls, and that the whole thing about our body images. I would say that the thing about the representation in social media and media everywhere, I just think about the trajectory of my own life, and not seeing someone who looked like me in a variety of places I didn't realize how that limited what I thought that I could do. Like I didn't think that that was happening. I think I still believed I was someone who could, make my way and be in charge of my destiny. But looking back, like there were all kinds of subtle messages along the way that showed me, well, you don't belong there, and you don't belong there, and you don't belong there, and you don't belong there. And over a lifetime, that shapes how you see your opportunities in all kinds of ways. And it's at my age, it takes a lot to unpack what that is and to still feel like that there is opportunity for me to create the pathways that I want for my own career, for my own life, for the choices that I make, and day to day. So it's powerful in a way that even as brown-skinned person was hard for me to recognize how much that holds sway over the way that we determine our lives. It almost makes me teary just thinking about that. And so it's one of the things that from, as a mother, my own perspective is to continually talk to my kids and show them what your opportunities are, what you can do, and to make that available for them and help them to see that regardless of what the culture shows you, regardless of what the culture tells you. But it's an uphill battle. It is an uphill battle.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And to our last question for our amazing panelists, we're going to start off with Marena, but this is a question for each and every one of you to answer. And I want us to close this out with what is the most important action or issue to advance constitutional equality that you want to see addressed right now?
Let's see. There's a lot of important issues that we need addressed in this entire topic. So a lot of them, so when we say the most important action, I think all of them are important. All of them are equally needed to be addressed. Right now, from where I am in the United States, one of the biggest issues that we're focusing on right now is the treatment of our female soldiers and veterans, especially in the Fort Hood area. I don't know how many of you have heard of Vanessa Gillen, and all these soldiers that are turning up found murdered on the side of the roads or on the side of railroad tracks from Fort Hood specifically. And there's been talks about a big ring that's going on over there in terms to sexual trafficking and possibly pedophilia. And so one of those issues is what we can address is like people will want to say, oh, we care about our veterans, we care about our soldiers. Okay, why are you not looking at Fort Hood? Why are you not looking at some of these army bases where women are not safe? You have commanding officers who are making unwelcome gestures and advances on people who are supposed to be defending our country. If we're sending our people out to defend our country against other countries, why can't we keep them safe within their own home? So one of the most important issues that we should be addressing is the treatment of our veterans and our soldiers, because this happens every day. And it was upsetting to see what happened with Vanessa. And she was considered MMIW because she was brown and she was indigenous to Mexico. And I was having a conversation with someone like yesterday about this, about how when we talk about MMIW, we're talking about all people who have indigenous roots, who do go missing and are murdered at 10 times the national average, because this happens in Canada, this happens in Mexico, this happens in every country in the Western Hemisphere in terms to our indigenous people. So addressing where these marginalized groups are being affected the most would heighten our chances of even actually getting equity in all aspects as far as race and gender.
Marena. Anybody else want to go ahead and answer that question as well? Go ahead, Kimberly, unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Like we said, there's so many issues here. The most important one is just, it's like picking fruit from a tree, just pick one. But, two things actually, I won't narrow it down. But one of them is that something that really underlies a lot of this that we don't talk about a lot because it's not necessarily violence related, but it's the economic inequality that pervades so much of our communities. since the 80s or so, the dollar doesn't go as far. The cost of housing has skyrocketed. The cost of education has skyrocketed. And we talk about people not being able to afford anything. And a lot of that is because of a fundamentally unfair tax system that we have, where people are taxed at a much greater rate when they can't afford it. And people who can afford more aren't paying their fair share. So if we really want to make some of these changes and have the resources to provide fundamental education for all of our students so that it's fair, and to provide job training or other services, then we need to actually have a fair and equitable tax system. And many people are afraid to talk about that because they're afraid to talk about taxes, period, especially if you're an elected official. But that's why we elect people, is they need to be making the hard decisions and the hard conversations. And we need to make sure they do push for that. So that's just something we need to be talking about. It underlies a lot of the violence that we see. And something a little bit more relevant and more timely is I've been working with some of our Native American elected officials here in Montana just this last week. And we were talking about the disproportionate amount of Native American women who are incarcerated and imprisoned compared with it's nearly 3 times the amount proportionally to their presence in our population. And we really need to look at why that's happening and what we can do to change it, because it not only impacts those women, but it impacts the generations to come, it impacts their children, and it really impacts our entire society if we're seeing that kind of a problem. Then if we want to have true equality throughout all levels of our society, looking into that and deciding what's happening and what we can do to change it, it needs to be a priority. And it hasn't been. It hasn't been a priority, and it's not something that a lot of people talk about, but we need to really be pushing for that. And in order to have, true equality for everyone, then it needs to be for everyone. And that's one marginalized group that does not get a lot of attention.
Thank you, Kimberly. Go ahead, Lei-Anna.
Kim, I think you're right on about that. And it is something that elected officials, are more afraid to talk about, I think, for exactly the reasons that you said. And so my plug about what everybody can do is look at our elections coming up, and just, if everyone can commit to just one conversation a week with somebody who, we all know somebody who we wonder how they're going to vote. We all do. And if we commit once a week, have the conversation, be brave. And even Ellie, who's not old enough to vote, like, you have so many people that you can speak to about those kinds of things. If from now until the elections, if we all spoke to one person that we knew was either sitting on the fence or that we thought we're going to, vote for somebody who's not going to be supportive of this, just be brave, have the conversation. That would be 10 conversations between now and when we vote. And then think of the ripple of that. It's the one thing we have the power of, is our conversations, how we connect with people, and speaking about what matters to us. Don't be afraid to talk about it.
Exactly. Thank you, Lei-Anna. Go ahead, Ellie. Let's hear from you.
I think that an important action and issue that is necessary to advance constitutional equality is passing the ERA. Of course, if we have that constitutional protection, then we can work on building even more legislation and fixing these issues that affect us. And I think it's frustrating that the government has made us jump through all these loopholes and put it on hold for so long. So I really hope we can actually finally pass that. And of course, there's so many things that need improving, but I think also just educating on these issues and making sure people really realize the inequalities that still exist. And of course, voting. It's difficult with the post office and, as we addressed earlier, voter suppression, but just trying to register for your absentee ballot and vote as soon as possible, get it in the mail. Don't let yourself be suppressed, and try to get your vote out there and have your voice heard, and have these issues that you care about and that matter to you reflected in your representatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. And I'm going to bring you to our last question. What do you think the most important issue right now in advancing constitutional equality that you would like to see addressed right now?
Yeah, I think that what Ellie had to say was great about education, and from the start, she said that she didn't even know that the ERA hadn't where it is where it is, and I'm gonna have to agree with her. I just have assumed that is where we're at, and that we're constitutionally protected. And I'm not gonna lie, the documentary was very eye-opening for me. Yeah. So I think education is probably one of the foundational points that we should focus on in educating people around us. I watched the documentary with my roommates, and we were all like, wow, this is very new and exciting and kind of frustrating all at the same time. And what can we do? So I think everything just comes back down to education and increased awareness of different issues at hand.
Thank you. Well, virtual hugs to you, my sister. This young woman, just there you have it, folks. She came on quoting Marsha P. Johnson right out the gate. I want to thank you for your leadership and also for your fearless commitment to queer women of color, queer people of color. And I think we can wrap up as of right now. But thank you, and thank you for all of your contributions today. That brings us to the end of our panel. Did any of the panelists want to give any final thoughts or comments or anything that you guys didn't hear addressed today? Did anybody want to give any final thoughts? Go ahead, Kimberly.
Thank you. Just, one thing, I've been inspired listening to everyone, and I think it's so important that we have those conversations that Lei-Anna said, and that we also be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because we don't know everything. We have to have those conversations, and we have to demand the change. We may not know everything about how that change will happen, but we know it needs to happen, and we know we need equality for everyone. So let's start pushing for it, have those conversations, be a little uncomfortable, it's okay, because we need to push for that change.
Agreed. Conversations like these are critical. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us here today. This was an amazing discussion. It was intersectional, diverse, and you all covered the gambit. Everything from building the bench, electing more women to office, pushing back on our privilege. We talked about the support for veterans, support of BIPOCs, support for women of color throughout our organizations, the importance of education policy. I mean, you guys jumped out here on racial justice, how we can't be single issue feminist. We covered domestic violence, violence against women. We have now been working on VAWA for a long time. The plight of mothers, students, intergenerational solidarity, and we even touched a little bit on criminal justice reform. I couldn't be more proud. I want to thank each and every one of you, and thank Carol Jenkins, Beth Ann Kennedy, and Bozeman Arts Live. And I definitely want to thank my friend and mentor, Jan Strout, for inviting me here today to be with you all and to help assist in just uplifting your voices and moderating this panel. I just want to give you a couple announcements from your feminist friends over here in California. California Now, I want to remind you to vote and wash your hands. My name is Kolieka Seigel, and I'm the first African-American president of the California National Organization for Women. You can reach us and get involved with us on Facebook and Instagram at California Now, at www.canow.org. We have a campaign going right now to get every woman registered and every woman counted. So I want to remind you to register to vote and also complete your census. And I'm going to piggyback right off of Lei-Anna's beautiful each one teach one. We need your mother, your sister, your cousin, your dog walker's friend to get out and fill out the census and to register to vote, because it is imperative in the way that we make change. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jan Strout, my friend and mentor, to close us out and to thank all of our sponsors. Thank you all.
Thank you all, because this was everything we hoped for and more. And I can't wait to share this everywhere, because the work you're doing, the inspiring voices and actions as leaders in every way is incredible. Want to say we're sorry for some technological issues. We're going to stick around and solve those and get them into the final version of this. But I do want to say we have calls to action coming up. In addition to your very important list and Kolieka's great summary, Montana Now welcomes the opportunity to support the leadership that you all are making and to also be able to collaborate with any of the issues in which you are interested. We look forward to that, and again, remind you to join us, check us out on our Facebook page, and we want to continue this conversation. It's critical. I also do want to support our sponsors, our co-sponsors, and thank them for all of the ways that they have made this possible, which include the AAUW of Bozeman, the Bozeman Business and Professional Women, the Bozeman for CEDAW, Women's Human Rights Initiative, thank you, Lei-Anna. California Now, of course, with Kolieka's fabulous kick-ass leadership, the Extreme History Project, which has been leading these discussions for many years and a very, very close friend of ours, the Friends of the MSU Library, the League of Women Voters, both the Bozeman chapter and the Montana chapter, the MSU Department of History and Philosophy that is using this program for their annual Constitution Day. So, hey, we're in everywhere. The MSU Program in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. So glad to have Lila's perspectives, and we'll make sure those are recorded. And a huge shout out to the MSU Women's Center, which contributed a lot. And the Body, Mind, Spirit Healthcare. Thank you again from Montana Now, all of our members, and we believe in the power of we. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Beth Ann and Bo and Kolieka and everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys so much. I'm so happy that I was able to do this with all of you. It was amazing. I really wish we could have heard Lyla, because I know how good she is with her words and how well she speaks out. She's not afraid to, and it's amazing. I hope to hear that when this comes out.
You will. That's why we're going to stick around and make sure we can include her important.
Yes, we're gonna stop in the recording now, but we're gonna ask you them for a minute to stick around, okay? Just